Hello. Today I'd like to talk about the Australia-India Institute. So this was created, I think, in 2008. It was a reaction to racist attacks on Indian students. I should explain that Australia has an excellent, really first-rate higher education system, and that many Indian students went to Australia to study. So this was something which earned money for Australia. It helped their university system. They're getting in good quality students, students who would come there not to party, but to study. And this was also, but there was a different context. You say Australia had a white Australia policy. It was always aware that it was vulnerable because of its geographic indication, and that as the power of the Royal Navy ebbed, Australia was always very aware. It was proactive. I think that you find that Australian diplomats, politicians, that they had a very different attitude, a pragmatic attitude, a very smart attitude towards the countries in the region. And I know, of course, that some Australian politicians, maybe they went too far in this direction or that direction. Dennis Rudd is an example. So, but Australia is a country without, it has a very small population, and you have Dr. Monk, you have other people who have spoken very frankly about deficiencies in the civil service or in this aspect or that aspect. But it has very, very intelligent and smart people. I remember I used to be a fan when I was a kid. I loved the James Bond movies. And there's a James Bond movie set in Japan, and my father, a colleague of his, that they were talking, and suddenly my dad says to me, "Oh, that film that you like, the one in Japan with the James Bond, and I think it was called, I don't remember." But he said, "Oh, the this person in that film, or the advisor, I don't remember exactly, was a famous Australian journalist, whom Ian Fleming, had met." So I remember that, and I always had I think most people who sort of grew up in the 70s or the 80s within a family or in a context, in a milieu where foreign correspondents and diplomats, where they were rated. I think Australia punched above its weight. And, if you look at the Australia-India Institute, I think he is punching above its weight. I took a look at, I know very little about these matters, but, they seem to be doing a good job. I looked at the sort of proposals or the ideas about economic cooperation, and it's well written. And that's a good thing about, if you go to Australia and you study in Australia, you work in Australia, you're coming to a pretty damn good, a high level. And you can, the world is your oyster. You can go from Australia to anywhere, and you can do well. So that's the first point that I'd make about the Australia-India Institute. But the second point I'd make is that I think about 16 fellows of the Institute have resigned. I've gone through them. one by one, and they're all shit. They are shit academics, marginal academics. They're rubbish. They don't know shit. There's a lady, I think she's from India, and so professor of law, and she thought that a private college, or any sort of college, which bans wearing the hijab, or the burqa, or the hijab, inside a girls' college. Inside, not outside. But in the classroom. She thought that, that would violate the Indian Constitution. But she's completely wrong. There was a Muslim lady who doesn't wear hijab, because very few people in India ever did so. And she was a High Court judge, and she was part of the bench who said that it is utterly false to say that a woman who doesn't wear hijab or doesn't wear burqa, a face covering or whatever it might be, it is utterly false to say that she is not a good Muslim, that she is not following an essential tenet of her faith. Sheikh Hasina, Benazir Bhutto, this lady judge herself, they were and are Muslims. Nobody's ever suggested otherwise. And you have some kids, stupid kids, influenced by ISIS, Islamic State ideology, and they're going, we must, we're in a class full of girls in a girls' college where there are no boys, but we must keep our hijab on because why? There is no need to do so. It is mad. And yet you have this very foolish lady, and she's a professor of law. And she ought not to be a professor of law because she doesn't know the law. She is stupid. And that's at the University of Melbourne. And, if that is affirmative action, Australians have to get rid of it. Because you have a good higher education system, but, if you get these sort of affirmative action nonsense people, the university may be able to make a profit off it. They may be able to, pay darkies from some other country and steal their money, swindle them of their money by saying, you're Muslim, go and study under this crazy law professor who doesn't know the law. She was wrong about the country of her own origin, or the country where she got her BA. I don't know what her origin was. You have a number of other really worthless people. You have Purushottam Bilamoria, who resigned. He hasn't said anything about it, but the guy is barely literate. He's just a crazy guy. Then you have, but he's old. Fair enough. He says to me, I tilted bills of cotton, and he has a sort of mythology of himself as. But he's a nice guy, but old, And you have a crazy American who wanted to be a singer, but he ended up with a PhD from the University of Texas in nonsense, and so he's teaching Hindi, which he can't speak. I looked at his videos where he's going, and there's a guy who's talking to him in Bhojpuri and Haryanvi and this language, and I could barely make it out because I come from the south. But this guy is clueless. He's going, which is fair enough because he's an American who wanted to be a singer, who's now teaching Hindi in Australia. he's making a big deal. He's saying, "Ooh, I stand with my slain comrades in India," and he mentions four people who, I know about this because I'm South Indian. But he doesn't know about it because he's not South Indian. He's not a Hindu. He doesn't know about the Veerashaiva Lingayat issue in Karnataka. So what he says about Kalburgi is just nonsense. He's just stupid. This is just an American guy. Uh, you know, you, you may know about homosexuality among Maithili folk singers, in a different part of the country. Might be a great expert in some aspect of that. But he knows nothing about other parts of India. You have this very nonsensical attack on the Institute of the Australia India Institute, which would come under the rubric of the University of Melbourne. I think I may be wrong. But the point is that in an institute, and the suggestion is that academic freedom has been violated because the Indian High Commissioner would say, look, please don't have an event which basically is going, India's horrible, Indians kill people, they're killing Muslims, because India wasn't killing Muslims. It was Australia, which was part of the War of Terror, which killed 1.3 million Muslims. Australia was part of that war on terror. Australia was part of the war in Yemen, which killed a lot of Muslims. India doesn't kill Muslims, Australia does. Australia is a racist country, always has been. It kills black people. It had a white Australia policy which was blatantly racialist. And the question arises, if academic freedom is required of the Institute of the Australia India Institute, why are people who want to denounce Australia for killing Muslims, Australia for killing black people, Aboriginal black people, Australia for white Australia policies, racialist policies, why they're not being given a platform? The answer is quite simple. The Australian government pays for it. And they pay for this institute to do one thing and one thing only, and that is to promote bilateral ties with India. The thing was set up after the murder and the killing of the racial attacks on Indians, and it is for a very specific purpose. And that purpose, of course, now has to do with the quadrilateral defense sort of arrangement between Japan, Australia, India, America. This is in the context of the possibility of Chinese aggression. So you have these very stupid people in Australia, and they are rubbish. You look them up, you say, have they done any good work? No, they're shit. 16 of them, I think, at the latest count, they've resigned from this, and they say that there has been an attack on academic freedom. But the Institute isn't supposed to be promoting academic freedom, it's supposed to be promoting bilateral ties. If it is an issue of academic freedom, then, of course, this institute should focus on the killing by Australians, by the Australian government of people in Yemen, by members of by army commanders by Australia's participation in the war on terror and in various other wars, not to mention the genocide and the grabbing of land from dark-colored people, like myself, people like, in fact, the Australian Aborigines must be related at a fundamental level to ancestral South Indian people like myself. They must have come through, and they must have left some it would be there in my genes. And we know that Tamil people, in fact, 4,000 years, sorry, it's about 4,000 years ago, the dingo, and there's some Tamil genes which came in, I think, in the north, that sort of thing. So the fact of the matter is that the Australia India Institute denies academic freedom. Indeed, that's its purpose. It's to build bilateral ties. That's why it exists. But I think the more serious question is why Australian academics, why are they not condemning Australia's part in the killing of Muslims? 1.3 million. That's an American estimate. There are other estimates that go up to 4 million. What was an Australian general doing in the Yemen conflict? These are the questions. These are the questions which must be asked. And of course, Australia still does have a very racist attitudes towards dark-coloured people. We are being murdered there. These are the questions which need to be asked. But to end, I think the Australia India Institute, it is, I have to say that it is the Australians who punch in a higher class than their weight. And I think that there are people in the defence establishment in India, there are other people in India that this could, we can learn a lot from what is being done there, and this is a good and vital thing. And I think it is important to understand that democracies do need to stand together, because what you see on your TV screens about Ukraine, and I think Australia already has that experience of being bullied by China. You see what's happening in the Solomon Islands. These are serious issues. So I think in this context, Australians do need to speak to their so-called academics. Not all of them, some of them are really smart. But the useless tossers and the ones who think that they're actually in America, and that, America's, of course, a great power. In America, you can do what you like. But Australia doesn't have that luxury. India does, because ultimately any confrontation with the Chinese would involve India with a larger population killing and taking big losses, but India can absorb it. And, India is not really at risk, but Australia is. So that is a penalty for being a white nation in a part of the world which isn't white by nature. So I think the Australia India Institute, but it needs better input from the Australians. It needs some plain speaking. It needs somebody senior, not a person of Indian origin, but a person of Aussie, outback, Crocodile Dundee origin, to say, don't be so bloody silly, shut up, and you're sacked. You're not an academic, you're a fool. Fuck off. That's what we want to hear from Australia, and that's what we want done in India. We have useless tossers who, the reason that you have so many Indian students going abroad is because you have cretins in Indian universities, very, very badly run. But all these things have to change. Thank you very much. And good day. Yeah, fuck. Yeah, that was terrible.